Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus, Northside Numbers Game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, joining great shows like The Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, and Baseball Rabbit Hole. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever it is you get your podcasts, and CubsPS Plus is always available, ad-free, to Patreon supporters at patreon.com/CubsPS Plus for as little as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. The spin on the baseball metric, OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it? Please drop a review wherever you find your podcasts. If you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you can share an episode with a friend. It's July 17th, 2024, and the Cubs are 47-51 after a 5-2 road trip to end the pre-All-Star game portion of the schedule. Shota Imanaga threw a scoreless inning in the All-Star game last night, and the Cubs are gearing up for a homestand against Arizona and Milwaukee coming out of the break. What's next for the Cubs with 2 weeks left before the trade deadline? Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. Welcome into episode 82. No Cub player has ever worn number 82, so we'll make this the Shota Imanaga episode of this podcast, in honor of a scoreless fourth inning in the All-Star game, and for his 82 FIP minus, which is fielding independent pitching normalized to 100, where being lower than 100 is good. Shota Imanaga is good, and the numbers say he's good. It may also be how far Vlad Guerrero Jr. threw his bat last night after getting blown away on a high fastball from Shota before grounding out. On the night, Shota got Vlad to ground out, struck out Adley Rutschman swinging, and then got Marcus Semien to line out to Jurickson Profar in left field. So it was a good night for the only Cub in the All-Star game. It was not such a good night for the National League, which lost 5-3. But no other Cubs played, so maybe that was the problem. No, I'm kidding. Before I get into this week's episode, I want to highlight something I'm going to be debuting this week. I've been trying to think about what to do with this podcast. I've had some thoughts for some shorter episodes, maybe some quicker hitters, and I've come up with an idea where I want to take a particular stat or two that I find interesting as the Cubs go through their day-to-day business and dive into something that's really a narrow topic and isn't going to take up the typical 40 minutes or 20 minute, I say 20 minutes. I can't remember the last time I had episode less than half an hour. But one way to kind of break that up is to take some of these interesting topics that aren't really a podcast episode to themselves and hit them in 5, 10, 15 minutes, much quick hitter episode. Sort of, if you're a Planet Money follower, they spun off The Indicator. And that's kind of what gave me the idea, was catching up on some of those episodes the other day. Of course, theirs is daily because they're NPR and they have a whole staff to do these things. But I'm calling it CubsPS Plus The Signs. So it's going to be a separate podcast, but it's going to stay in the same feed. It'll just show up in your box if you're a subscriber. And it's going to dive into a particular topic. So the very first one, I'll probably release it on Friday. It's going to be about blown saves. Obviously, that's been a big factor for the Cubs this year. But what does a blown save mean? They're not all the same. Some of them come in the 6th, some of them come in the 10th. All blown saves are not equal. So I'm going to dive into what to look for when you're trying to evaluate a bullpen and blown saves. So without spending 5 minutes and using up that whole episode now, I will tease it and get out. So CubsPS Plus The Signs, I'm going to start having that once or twice a week, show up in your podcast feed, much more of a quick hit. If you guys like it, don't like it, give me feedback. I'm definitely open to keeping this something that you want to continue to listen to. So as it stands now, let's talk about the Cubs. So they're pretty disappointing first half. And first half, up to the All-Star game, we're 98 games into the season, which is well past the 81 midway point. The trade deadline's coming up very soon. It's actually 2 weeks from today. And the Cubs don't even play till Friday. So when they play their first game back after the break, they'll have less than 2 weeks before the trade deadline. I've talked a lot. I'm not going to get into it here. I don't think this team is really built to sell. There are pieces they can sell. I also think they're the Cubs. They're, I think, third highest in revenue in the sport. And being a seller 3 years out of 4, is a terrible look. I think this team, last couple of years, 2021, they were clearly going to sell if things didn't go well, and they didn't. 2022, they were built to sell. 2023, they were really kind of built to go either way. They had expiring contracts that they could have traded, or they could have done what they did and pursue some sort of buying strategy. This year, they're not built to sell. Selling was not the intent of this season. They came in wanting to compete. Now, I think they've clearly done that poorly. Some of it is front office. Some of it is players. I don't think the front office did enough to deepen the bullpen. And yet also while you have to bake injuries into the bullpen, the pitching staff, the starting lineup, I think the bullpen in particular, really the pitching staff in particular, especially early in the season, really set everything up for failure. So they came into the season with Adbert Alzolay set as the closer. I was okay with that, but you did have to factor in that Alzolay, while he was a highly regarded prospect all the way through the system, he did have pretty consistent arm injuries. Now, for the better part of a season and a half, season plus, maybe not quite season and a half, he had shown he could stay relatively healthy, but he did fade last season because it was his first full season really of Major League pitching. So going with him, I think they had Julian Merriweather clearly slotted as, closer B if closer A experiment didn't work. You had Yency Almonte, and then you had Hector Neris. And Merriweather went down early with the injury. He's just now getting close to coming back. Yency Almonte went down. So while Alzolay faltered, and I don't know the full story, hopefully we'll find out at some point, I don't think he was ever right to start the season, but either way, he clearly struggled, and somebody else had to step in. By the time that day came to step somebody else in, Merriweather was gone, and I think at that point Almonte was hurt. If not, he had been hurt earlier, came back, looked really good, and then got hurt. So I can't remember exactly where Almonte was in that stretch, but Merriweather was gone and went to Neris. There have been some struggles, but he is 13 out of 16 on saves since being put in as closer, which is not exactly Mariano Rivera territory, but it's also not complete garbage either, even though he's earning his nickname Heart Attack Hector. But one of the other things that hurt this bullpen early were injuries to the starting pitching. Jamison Taillon missed the first month of the season. Justin Steele got injured on opening day and missed about a month, something very close to that. Shota Imanaga came over, and he was great from the start, but he also had a couple outings where he didn't go super deep. He had the one against the Dodgers where got caught in a rain delay and couldn't finish the fifth inning. Jordan Wicks started the season throwing pretty well, but not going deep. Javier Assad, same story. And then with some of those guys out, Kyle Hendricks was struggling, especially to start the season. You had fill-in starts from Ben Brown, Hayden Wesneski at times, and those guys, when they first went in, were not in condition to go deep into games. And so it really put a lot of pressure on the bullpen, racked up a lot of innings early, and the bullpen has really largely settled down lately. I'll get into some of that on the CubsPS Plus The Signs podcast later this week. But it all was kind of the perfect storm. And now we're in a position where the Cubs are, top 10 in baseball for quality starts. They're consistently getting out there. I think Jamison Taillon missed a seventh straight quality start by one out his last time out. Justin Steele has had a quality start, I think 7 of his last 8, something like that. Shota Imanaga continues. He's gotten really hammered a couple times, but basically if they don't hammer him, he's going pretty deep in the ball game, and he's looking good. And this team just needs to continue to pitch like that, take some of the pressure off the bullpen. We've seen some young arms step up and do some good things. Porter Hodge has looked mostly good. He was a little shaky, last Saturday in a game the Cubs blew in St. Louis. But that's going to happen with a young kid. For the most part, he's thrown strikes. For the most part, he's been good. Luke Little now is injured. We'll find out hopefully fairly soon, get a better report on him and see how long he's out for. But for him, it's command. I mean, he's not gotten hit hard very much at all. The only question is how many guys is he going to walk before potentially giving a hit. When he's not walked guys, he's been really effective. Daniel Palencia did not pitch this last time up, but he's back and forth with command issues. But again, the raw stuff is great. And one thing to remember with Palencia, he's only been a relief pitcher for about 14 months. It was last May. They took him out of the rotation in the minors and converted him to a reliever and started giving him leverage spots in AA a little bit and then up to AAA. So he's still kind of learning that role and settling in. He's a guy that I hope they can really harness. Hunter Biggie has been great at Iowa, was dominant his first outing and then really struggled his second time out. The second time out was also, not a game with a lot of stuff on the line, but, it was not his best work. And now he's back to Iowa, but I love that 100-mile-an-hour fastball. Dude throws hard. But for me, the biggest thing to watch in the second half is the offense. Early in the season when the Cubs got to 17-9, I mean, they were scoring a lot of runs. They were jumping on starting pitchers. They were knocking starters out early. There were a lot of, I'm not going to compare the personnel, not the same. The team is obviously not as good. But we saw a lot of what the Cubs were doing in like 2016, 2015, 2016 against teams. They were just working counts, making starting pitchers rack up pitch count early, getting some runs in, getting to the squishy middle of that bullpen in the 5th, 6th inning. And they were piling it up, and offensively, they looked like a really good team. Then they had a couple injuries there. Seiya Suzuki gets hurt. Ian Happ was back and forth with a hamstring early in the season. Dansby Swanson played through a sore knee for a couple weeks before going on the injured list. Horner had a hamstring. So there were a number of things there that, kind of pulled away. But really it was as those guys came back, that's really when the offense started to take a back seat a little bit. And it's been interesting. They had a 5-2 road trip right before the All-Star break ever since, it's 7 games since I last podcasted. And they played really well. I mean, they hit the ball really well in Baltimore. They won that. They swept that series and beat a very good Oriole team 3 in a row with a final total score of 21-2. And it was a dominant series for the Cubs. Then they beat the Cardinals 5-0 on Friday night before the wheels kind of fell off on Saturday. But they righted the ship on Sunday with an 8-3 win, 6 home runs, 2 each from Morel and Pico Armstrong. So, I mean, that was really good to see. It was a nice little rebound right before the break. And when you look at where the Cubs are, they're 4 games under 500. They're 8.5 games behind Milwaukee. They're in last place in the Central. And when you look at the wild card race, they're currently 6 spots out of the last wild card spot. But really what you have in the National League is you got the Phillies and the Dodgers. The Phillies are really running away with everything. Dodgers have a ton of pitching injuries, so they're kind of scuffling a little bit right now. They're a game better than Milwaukee. So those are the 3 division leaders right now. You got the Braves are kind of the clear leader in the wild card race. They're safe by 4 games for a spot at 53 and 42. Cardinals are second place, 3.5 games behind Atlanta. And then the Mets are 4 games behind Atlanta. And then after that, you've got the Diamondbacks are a game out of that last wild card. So are the Padres. The Pirates are a game and a half out. Reds are 3. Giants are 3. Cubs are 3.5. And then Nationals have been hanging in there. Maybe they're starting to fade out. They just made a kind of a sell trade the other day. They're 6 out of the wild card race. So if you look at who's really in contention, Rockies and Marlins are not. They are 16 and 16.5 games out of the wild card race. They are done. And so you look at the wild card race, and it's really the teams to the Cubs, maybe the Nats. I think the Nats are pretty much falling out of it. So right now you would look at it as the Cubs are last in the what I would consider to be the serious wild card race. And so on the one hand, they're 3.5 out. A 3.5 game lead in July is far from insurmountable. I mean, it's not a problem. 8.5 in the division is kind of getting there, but still, there's 2.5 months of the season to go. The Cubs still have some games left against the Brewers. There's time to make that up if they play well, hit a hot stretch. The biggest challenge they're going to face is the fact they're trailing so many teams. And they're going to get shots against most of them. The Cubs are done with the Mets. The Cubs have a couple series left. Actually, maybe just 1 series left with the Cardinals. It's a 4-game series in Wrigley. The Cubs have an upcoming series against the Diamondbacks. This will be the last time the Cubs play them. And they're done with the Padres. They've still got more games against the Pirates, more games against the Reds. And I'm pretty sure they still have 1 series left against the Giants. So it's going to come down to tiebreakers may come into play. And not all these teams are going to be cold. Not all these teams are going to be hot. A couple of these teams probably will fall out. And this is what also makes the trade deadline so interesting this year. I mean, this is just the National League. You've got the 3 division leaders who are clearly all competing they all think they have a shot to win the World Series. I don't know that I believe that with Milwaukee, but I did not believe Milwaukee would be in this spot either. So I'm pretty much an unreliable witness on that one. But you look at the Braves, Phillies, Dodgers, definitely among the preseason favorites for the World Series. But then the rest, after Atlanta, assuming they hold on to that spot and don't collapse, you've got all those teams going for 2 spots. So who's going to be a buyer and who's going to be a seller? I could see the Reds and the Pirates. They're both pretty young, have a lot of young kids coming up. I could see them doing something, but maybe not that much. I don't think they're going to trade out of some of their good young prospect depth to add this year when they're, 500 or 500 in Pittsburgh's case or 3 below for Cincinnati to really push. But at the same time, the Pirates have Paul Skeens and Jared Jones going right now. And that's a duo you can ride in the playoffs. If you squeak into the wild card spot and you got a 3-game series against one of the division winners or a different wild card, I would take my chances in 3 games with Skeens and Jones going. Padres have been built to win. They've spent a lot of money the last few years and don't have a whole lot to show for it. So I would imagine they're going to stay in the race and look to add. Diamondbacks were in the World Series last year. They're a young team. They've, like the Cubs, they've got some guys who were struggling that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be struggling. Mets are probably not huge buyers this year. I think this was going to be kind of a transition year. They spent all that money last year and it was such a disappointing season. And so they have some of those guys, but Pete Alonso's on the last year of his deal. They've got rid of some of the money off the books last year. They're going to get more money off the books this year. I expect them to be super aggressive in the offseason, but I don't know how much they're actually going to do at the deadline, especially running a clear third in that division in this wild card race. But I wouldn't be surprised if they add a couple pieces. And what's interesting from here is I did a look last year, and I'll revisit it as the season goes on this year, but I took a look last year at the previous 10 seasons, non-COVID, and they didn't, obviously last year was the first year for the 3 wild cards. So there's not a lot of history on the 3 wild cards with teams actively, competing for it. But generally the rule of thumb I've seen is if you win 86 games, you're pretty much going to make the playoffs as the 3rd wild card. There will be a couple seasons here and there where that won't be true. But even I have to go back and look, but I think even in 2015, when the Cubs and Pirates were the 2 wild cards at 97 and 98 wins, there was a big fallback after that. I think the next closest team would have been about 86, 87 wins. Now that would have been different. You would have had, obviously, once the Cubs and Pirates were running away with the wild card 2 slots, then it became so clear nobody was competing to come in 3rd. So, the race could have gone differently, but it probably would have just resulted in somebody having a higher win total, not a lower win total. So for the Cubs to get to 86 wins, now last year 83 wins made the playoffs. But if you get to 86, that means the Cubs have to go, what's the math here? They have to win 39 more games. So that's 39 and 25. It's 14 games over 500 from where they are now. Would get them to 86 and 76. It'd be 10 over on the season. This team's capable of it. This is a team that I said before the season I thought could win 90 games, potentially even higher. I have a hard time seeing 90 wins from here, so we'll see how the season goes, but I'm going to guess I'm going to come up short, potentially significantly short on that prediction. But I do still think the raw underlying talent of this team is there. We see it in the starting rotation every day. I said they're top 10 in baseball in quality starts. They have a bona fide ace in Justin Steele. They have a guy in Shota Imanaga who has looked really, really good so far. They've got a veteran presence in Jamison Taillon who's throwing well consistently. Just start after start after start, he's giving you depth. And he's shaken a lot of the troubles he had last year with that extra arm side run on his 4-seam fastball, and he's stabilized his pitches a little bit. They got Kyle Hendricks still in the rotation. He's been up and down. He was awful to start the season, went to the bullpen, then had to come back to the rotation after injuries. And he's had some big starts. He threw really well against the Cardinals Friday in St. Louis. He does kind of own the Cardinals, so that's nice. If he's going to start another, hopefully he'll get one of those 4 games against St. Louis when they play later this year. But there are question marks in the rotation. Hayden Wesneski was awful on Saturday. Some of it was defensively. He got sped up. He did not handle the moment as that game went south. But he's also made some quality starts. He was really, really good. I think his previous outing was 6+. I think it was 6 1/3. It might have been 6 2/3. One hit baseball. So he's capable of being a good pitcher. And you're asking him to be like the 5. And so that's kind of okay. They got Javier Assad back now too. He was rough on Saturday in game 2, but he also missed 3 weeks, and because they had the double headers right before the All-Star break, they activated him without giving him a rehab start in Iowa. And there's a reason why guys go to rehab. There's also a reason why, even if a guy only makes one rehab start, you might see a line where they throw 4 innings, give up 6 hits, walk 2 or 3, and it looks rough. But the rehab start is not about dominating hitters. Obviously, I'm sure the pitcher would love to if they can. But it's really all about getting that work back, getting the feel, getting the command. And you can see that Assad did not have the command. I assume he's probably throwing, I'm sure he's been on regular rotation, so I'm sure he's had his bullpen day this week. He probably won't start for another round, so I don't know if they'll have him do like a simulated game or some extra throwing, but I would hope and expect that by the time he comes back, maybe one more start. We saw Justin Steele come back after a month off, and he did do some rehab, and he still was not, he was pretty good his first outing out. After that, he had another 1 or 2 where he was just not quite himself, just didn't quite have the feel, didn't quite have the command on all of his pitches. Yeah, I'm sure we'll see a little bit of that from Javier Assad. And he's a guy who already, it's kind of a danger zone for Javi because I've talked about him on this pod, but he's a guy who likes to pitch, I'm sure he doesn't like to, but he winds up pitching himself into some trouble, and then he's pretty good about pitching out of it. And he's been doing that for, 220 plus innings. It's going on more than 2 years at this point. So he's capable of doing it, but if he does not have his feel, he'll get in trouble, and then he just can't quite get out of it. But the Cubs have the starting pitching to give themselves a chance to win. The bullpen's emerging. I suspect they're about to get either Caleb Killian or Julian Merriweather back this week. So the Cubs just made a roster move. They signed a minor league, they traded for a guy, cash for a guy from the Royals on basically a minor league deal. So he'll go report to Iowa most likely, and we'll see what happens from there. But as an add-on move, the Cubs option Daniel Palencia back to AAA. So the Cubs are sitting at 25 guys on their roster right now, 12 pitchers. So they're missing that 13th pitcher. My guess is Merriweather has thrown multiple rehab outings now in Arizona. So has Caleb Killian. Killian's looked pretty good. His velocity's been up. He's right back velocity-wise to where he was this spring. I think the big question with him is he going to be a guy they come up and put in the Cubs bullpen, which I think was the plan to start the season. But he got hurt too early in spring training to necessarily know for sure. Or would they send him to Iowa to potentially stretch back out and try to be able to go 5+ as a starting pitcher? I don't know which way they're thinking at this point. But with Julian Merriweather, it's definitely back to the pen. And he's done well, but his velo is not quite back to where it was before. I think the last outing I saw, he was kind of topping out 96 as opposed to the 98, 99 he was throwing last year. So we'll see, but I'm guessing they're going to wait until Friday to make a decision on their last roster spot. They may already know the decision, but they'll wait to do it because one thing they'll have to look at is activating Merriweather and or Killian will require the Cubs to free up a 40-man spot. So the options there are to either let somebody go, DFA somebody to open a spot, or potentially move somebody else to the 60-day injured list. And I think, I don't know all the injury outlooks, but there have been some more injuries in the minor leagues. Brennan Davis, who's been so close to the bigs so many times, has another fracture in his back. I have not heard timeline on that, but I cannot imagine it's a short-term injury. They also have Matt Mervis has an injury to his hamate bone in his hand, which is notorious. I think Mike Trout, missed half a season with a hamate injury a couple of years ago. So I think either one of those guys could potentially be candidates to go to the 60-day injured list, which would free up, whether it's one of them or both of them, free up 1 or 2 spots. Another one I don't think they want to do, but potentially could, is Ben Brown, who's been on the injured list since July 11th or June 11th. And he has not been progressing that well with some sort of a stress reaction in his neck. Not exactly sure what that injury is exactly. They've had him throwing a little bit. He ramped up. He wasn't making progress. So they kind of cooled him back down a little bit. The speculation I've read, it looks like maybe they're hoping he can come back before the end of August or end of July. So if they think he'll be back before the end of July, they won't put him on the 60-day injured list. But if they think it could carry into August, then they could put him on the 60-day injured list, retroactive to June 11th, which would put him back, eligible to be activated August 10th. So if you think it's into August, a couple more days may not make that big of a difference. But if they don't convert people on the injured list, look at the list of guys, to potentially cut off the 40-man. It's a pretty thin list. I mean, Gensi Almonte is already not on the 40-day because the 40-man roster is on the 60-day injured list. Same with Adbert. They got Michael Arias, who's in the minor leagues. He has not been called up, was added this last offseason as Rule 5. He's not going anywhere. Cubs need Javier Assad. They're going to need Hunter Biggie. Colton Brewer's now on the 60-day injured list after punching a wall because we all get pissed. We all do stupid things, but that was Colton Brewer's stupid thing. And so he's pretty much done for the year. He would probably be a DFA candidate if he wasn't on the 60-day injured list. So he's already not taken up a 40-man spot, but you can't DFA a guy while he's injured. Ben Brown, again, like I said, he could go. The rest of these guys, I mean, obviously none of the main starting 5 are going to go down. Caleb Killian's hopefully working back. Porter Hodge looks good. Mark Leiter Jr. I guess Jorge Lopez, if you had to cut somebody, but he's pitched well since coming over from the Mets. Tyson Miller's been great since coming over from Seattle. Hector isn't going anywhere. Ethan Roberts isn't going anywhere. The only other thing to think about is as we head to the trade deadline, I do think the Cubs will take a buy and sell approach. So there may be some deals worked out where maybe they trade somebody out of this bullpen or throw a couple guys together to get something else back that they think they need. And maybe a deal like that maybe you wind up moving like 2 guys for 1 or 3 guys for 2, that sort of thing. So you have that spot back. And for Killian's case, Merriweather, when he gets activated, he will come back to Chicago and go. Killian could go either way. He could get assigned to Iowa to continue to pitch, but in order to come off his rehab assignment, and it's a 30-day limit to the rehab assignment, and Killian is, I think, they're both Killian and Merriweather are about 2 weeks in. I think Merriweather's a few days ahead of him. So really, within a couple weeks, they're going to have to come off the 60-day injured list unless they have a setback and be sent somewhere. And for Caleb Killian to go to Iowa would have to be optioned, would have to come back to the 40-man roster. On the position player side, again, unless they put Matt Mervis or Brendan Davis on the 40-day IL or 60-day IL, there's not much to do. I'm pretty sure Nick Madrigal is already there. Everybody else is either, like Luis Vazquez is in Iowa, but they're not going to cut ties with him. Everybody else is either up or working back from their own injury, or Kevin Alcantara is one of their top prospects for the future. So they're a little bit tight right now, but my guess will be that we'll see at least one of those guys activated by Friday, probably with either Brendan Davis or Matt Mervis going to the 60-day injured list would be my best guess. But, coming out of it, this team is showing some life. Christopher Morel has been rough. I talked about it a lot on the last episode. Mike Cotton and I have talked about it. The strikeout rate, while he made those clear improvements earlier this season, they have largely stuck. The strikeout rate, the swing and miss rate is starting to creep back up for him. He's still taking some walks, which is encouraging because that's one of the things that he struggled with last year. But he just still think he needs to focus on that overall approach. Just get back to middle of the field approach, not being quite so pull happy. Now, if he's going to hit 2 bombs like he did the other day and pull stuff to the, deep into left, then so be it. I will live with those. But in the meantime, Miles Mastrobuoni is playing a really good third base. He's hitting more than he had before. The overall season numbers don't look very good, but his splits for July are good. Since coming back up, Miles is hitting 278. He's slashing 278, 308, 306. 613 OPS, which is not setting the world on fire, but it's a far cry better than where he was before, providing good defense. He's actually been a little bit hotter than that. If I look just at, July, it's a little bit better. He's hitting 276, 310, 313, 310. But he's been showing better presence at the plate. He has not struck out much. He has taken his walks. So I think we'll continue to see that. We'll see what the team does at the deadline. I think third base is clearly a position that if they're going to look to add at the deadline, that's a place where they can get improvement. Michael Busch has been fantastic. He's really emerging as a offensive presence at first base, so that's pretty solidified. Cody Bellinger, broke his finger, has a fracture in his middle finger after getting hit by a pitch. They put him on the injured list, so he's going to be close to coming back. Well, he's going to be close to being eligible to come back after the break, and we'll see. It's going to come down to how that finger feels, how it responds to treatment, how he's able to swing a bat. It'll be interesting when he comes back because right now it's Pete Crow-Armstrong in center field pretty much every day, and Michael Busch at first base. After that, before, to get Pete Crow-Armstrong in, you were giving Bellinger some time at first base. Bellinger is still better defensively at first base than Michael Busch is, but I don't know about making Michael Busch a full-time DH with the improvements he's shown defensively. So it'll be an interesting decision to make. We'll see if Bellinger's able to make it back. There have also been trade rumors with Bellinger. Mike Tauchman's also been out with a groin injury. We'll see what happens with him. He could potentially come back, and that gets really interesting. So if Bellinger's back and Mike Tauchman is back, does PCA go back down to Iowa? I could see him going back down to Iowa to continue to work on his offense to some extent, but I really think at this point, PCA is a guy that just needs to see big league pitching. He's shown he can hit in the minor leagues. He has really good AAA numbers this year. Had some success towards the end of last season after an adjustment period when he got called up. And defensively, he's already, I could make a case that he's the best in baseball right now, defensively in center field. He's just effortless. The amount of ground he covers is staggering. There was a ball against the Cardinals where he was playing in left center and had to run, deep into the right center gap to catch one, and he just coasted to it. Or it looked like he coasted to it. He coasts probably faster than, I can drive half the time, but he just makes it look so easy out there. And I think, talked about this a little bit before, but I think the team around him has to get used to playing with him. He's kind of run in on Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki a little bit on some balls that they've caught. And on the one hand, center fielder is the captain of the outfield and kind of takes the balls they can get to. In PCA's case, I think he has to find that line on, hey, I've got a 2-time Gold Glove winner in left field. If Ian Happ is camped under a ball, run behind him and back him up, rather than go in there and kind of take it from him. Seiya's kind of having the struggles maybe PCA takes so he can get to in right center. But then also coming in, Nico Horner and Dansby Swanson are both very much used to going out and covering a lot of ground on pop-ups. And I've seen a couple times already. There's one in particular, forget now, I think it was the series before Baltimore, where Pete's coming in hard and Nico's going out hard. Nico couldn't quite get to it. And I think PCA he had to kind of deviate the last second to kind of adjust to kind of slide in and still try to catch it while staying out of Nico's way. I think that's one if Nico kind of peels off it, and there's still probably a communication issue. Maybe PCA wasn't yelling loud enough, hey, I got it. Or maybe he wasn't sure he had it. I don't know. But it looked like one I thought he could get to if he didn't kind of protect Nico on that play. But that's just all experience and time, and that doesn't get better with PCA playing in AAA. So if Cubs get to a point where Tauchman and Bellinger are back, I would not be at all surprised if one of those guys gets traded. Mike Tauchman would have big value, assuming he's healthy and assuming he can show he's healthy, would have good value to any contender as a bench bat. He's a very good fourth outfielder. He can spot start. Obviously, we had the whole summer of Mike Tauchman. He had a great run earlier this season when he had to start. He's a good baseball player. And he might be one of the Cubs' more tradable assets. And I think there comes a point where it kind of depends. It also depends, too, on Morel. So Christopher Morel is not hitting the way the Cubs hoped he would. I think he's shown some improvement at third base, but he's still not strong over there. Clearly not as good as Mastrobuoni. And there's a point where if Morel is hitting enough, if he's, throw batting average out because the whole league is hitting 242, but if Christopher Morel is putting up a 115, 120 WRC plus with a bunch of power, you can probably afford to live with his defense to some extent. He's going to out-hit a lot of his mistakes. But right now he's got like a 97, 98 WRC plus, which is average-ish. But you can't have a little bit below average bat with a well below average glove. So that forces Morel more to the DH position. Now, if he could get hitting, go get on a tear after this 2-homer game, start hitting at a 120 plus WRC plus clip, then at that point they can give him more starts at third base because you're compensating for the lack of defense. And that might allow more for maybe, say, a Suzuki to DH and put Cody Bellinger in right field with PCA in center. those are the kinds of ways they're going to have to look at this in the second half to piecemeal it, but they're going to have to go. I mean, the experimental time of the season is over. One of the best things you can do by starting early, and I thought the Cubs did actually bank a good number of wins in April. So you can't win anything in April, as they say, but you can lose things for yourself in April. And the Cubs got off to a really good start, 7-9 against what appeared to be a pretty tough schedule in April, and then started falling back in May and June. But they had given themselves some cushion, and they've now used that cushion up. As noted, they're probably last among the contenders for the wild card of the National League. They are last in their division, but not by much. They're 3.5 games out of the wild card, despite trailing that many teams. They are 5th in the division, but they're 4 games out of second place. So it's all there for the taking. They just have to do it. But they're also going to need some help. Those on the plus side, those other teams are going to play each other. There are going to be times where St. Louis is playing Arizona and the Padres are playing the Giants. And as they play, the good and the bad is as those teams match up, one team is going to have to lose and the other team is going to have to win. So hopefully, the Cubs are a couple teams start to fall out of it. Hopefully the Cubs make a push. If the Cubs get hot, they're going to make up a lot of ground really fast. And if they can add a couple pieces to the deadline that make this all better, all the better. I am in favor of them. Talked about it before. This isn't the first time, but a mixed buy-sell strategy. I think they can add a bullpen arm or two probably relatively cheaply. And then in that scenario, I don't really care if it's a rental player or not. But beyond that, I think for position players or, if the Cubs do look to potentially deal a Nico Hoerner or Cody Bellinger, Cody, maybe you're moving off the salary, just trying to clear up the $30 million, create space for PCA to play, let Michael Busch have first base. Maybe that's the point of that trade. If you're trading Nico Hoerner, you're probably trying to kind of rebalance the roster. Maybe at that point, maybe you start looking at Michael Busch at second base or Christopher Morel at second base. Maybe later in the season is when a guy we haven't seen from the minor leagues gets called up. Maybe Casey, potentially a Matt Shaw, James Triantos, Moises Ballesteros. There are options in the system that could come up. I don't think any of those guys, barring more significant injuries, will come up and play a key role, but it's on the table if they get to that point. Or if the Cubs wind up having an awful July and really fall out of this thing, then maybe we'll see some of those guys come up and play to start building for next year. But if you're going to go look and add a big piece, if you're going to take substantial prospect capital, you're going to trade a couple of your top 10 prospects, you're going to trade 3 of your top 20. It needs to be for a guy who's around for more than just this year. So I hear Vlad Guerrero talked about a lot. I don't know what interest the Cubs have in him. I don't know how he fits on this roster. You're not necessarily looking for somebody to fill first base because Michael Busch has that down. Maybe you put him at DH, or maybe, there are so many scenarios it's hard to even get into. As we get closer, I'll probably do one episode on the trade deadline, maybe bring in somebody else to talk about it, bring in a guest to talk about it with me. But there's so many directions to go. But the Cubs do need kind of that big bat presence in this lineup. I think the Cubs have a lot of really good pieces. Ian Happ now, after having some struggles early, is having a fantastic season. Seiya Suzuki started the season quickly, got injured, struggled coming back from injury, but he's been great. So you've got those two guys. You kind of need that one more big anchor. And it was supposed to be Cody Bellinger, but he's hit okay for average when he's been in there, but he's not driving the ball like he has in the past. So, where's it going to come from? It kind of thought it would be Bellinger and or Morel. Morel does lead the team in home runs at 18, but he's really fallen back over the last month. So can he reemerge and establish to be that guy, or are the Cubs going to have to go get that guy? We don't know. But I do think any major additions need to be looked at with 2025 in mind, and even the subtractions. I see people talking about, like, oh, I bet we could get some good stuff for Jamison Taillon because the starting pitcher market is always hot. You maybe can. And maybe they even should potentially. But you do have to keep in mind that, unless Jed's going to decide to just tear this thing back to the studs again, which would be just an absolutely insane move, they're going to have to go replace Jamison Taillon this offseason. So if you're going to go do that with a free agent pitcher, you're going to wind up paying more than you're paying for JMO because the market goes up every year. So yeah, they have to keep 2025 in mind. If they move a piece out, what's the plan to fill that spot? Now, maybe you have some targets in the offseason. Maybe you've got some free agent targets. Maybe you've got some trades you're working on you think you can pull off in the offseason. That's great. Have a plan. But I am excited. Now we have 2 days without baseball, which is always hard. I kind of miss when it was 1 day off for the break, but it's probably good for the players. They get the 2 days. And everybody's back on Friday. But, a couple days with no baseball. So I'll talk here. I know if any of you are Sun Ranto Show listeners, there's going to be a roundtable episode. I may or may not be on tomorrow night. And tomorrow's my 25th wedding anniversary, so I've got to do all the things I need to do to get to 26. And that may involve not ditching my wife on our anniversary to go be on a podcast. But, content for me is going to continue to come. I'm kind of re-energized. I had some issues earlier this season, got a little bit too irregular, but I'm feeling good. I'm really excited about CubsPS Plus, the signs. So look for that. Again, give me feedback if you think it's not good or not focused, or if you love it, let me know either way, good or bad. It all helps the show. But stay, enjoy summer. There've been a bunch of big storms, so I hope everybody's doing okay. And, stay safe from those. Get some crazy weather. We're hot here in Charlotte. Stay cool, stay dry, stay safe, and get ready for the Cubs on Friday. It's going to be a quick sprint out of the gate once the games start playing again. We'll see what they do over the next 2 weeks. That's going to tell us an awful lot about what the rest of the season is going to be. Thank you for joining me today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and a review wherever it is you get your podcasts, and share the episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. And check out the Patreon page at patreon.com/CubsPS Plus to help support the show. Also, stay tuned later this week for the debut of CubsPS Plus, The Signs, a shorter, once or twice a week episode to dive into some number that's interesting and relevant to what the Cubs are doing. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the CubsPS Plus podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!